This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, I have two Avoid the Maze podcasts, so please don't get confused because both of them talk about special people, but this one particularly does. My guest today is also a life coach, and sometimes we become coaches because we've learned certain things in our life, and we are now ready to share those thoughts with other people. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to all follow the same path, because believe me, uh, we don't, but we can learn from each other. So, my guest today is Marc Scheff, and Marc is in the New York area. And tell us a little bit about yourself, because as I've read your bio from Podmatch, you've met with some pretty distinguished people. And, um, as you're reading it, somebody could just like drop their jaw and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be talking to Marc because I'm not
Right,
up in
right.
that realm. But I've also talked to some famous people, and I never thought of them as famous when I was talking to them. So we'll go
Yeah.
from there. But tell us how you became the person that you are today and how you're helping others, and specifically how you're helping your two incredible kids.
Oh wow. Well, I mean, if you ask them, they may have a very different answer. Um, Last night I was definitely the worst daddy ever when we enforced the iPad limit time. But thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I just want to say up front, I love the podcast and I appreciate the message you're putting out in the world. So glad to be a part of it. Um, how did I get where I am? I mean, my journey, like some, has been kind of varied. I think for a long time, I was really and very, very good at going after, the next inspiring thing, which didn't always look like the next obvious thing. Like I had a career in tech that I left to go back and become an artist, and I was doing that work in video games. And then I said, no, I'm going to go into illustration. And then I went off into fine art. And so it's almost like almost about every 5 years, I go through this like, well, let's refine. And while it may look nonlinear, because in all of that, you mentioned some of my sort of top, I guess, top tier clients in a way. Like marketing's a funny thing, those names are impressive, but a lot of the people that I work with are, they're creatives, they are activists, they are people who want to, make a positive change in the world. And whether that's through their art or through their organizing, their work, that's what really has always inspired me, but didn't call to me to necessarily do that work on the ground. And so what I'm doing now, I get to actually support people who want to do those things. That's maybe a non-answer. I think where it all started, and I won't tell the whole, last 25 years, but where it all started was really, it's actually kind of funny. It was my first job out of college, and somebody that I knew from work said, I think you should do this workshop. And I'm going to say the name, and I know people have a lot of feelings about it, but try to reserve your feelings. It was something called the Landmark Forum. Um, and I did it, and it kind of really opened my eyes into the power of self-examination, into the power of deep inner work. And so, when I say I work with people who want to do X, Y, and Z, it's a little bit of a red herring, because what the work that I really do is the work of discovering yourself. Now that sounds like very woo, like, okay, I don't need to self-discover, I need to get this job, or I just need to make money, or I need to like fix this thing. Yes. And I've seen over and over again, I've worked with hundreds of people, and over again, when I work with people, they come in and they have a thing that's right in front of them, the job, the money, whatever it is, the relationship. What it always comes back to is the feeling that they want to have in their life, the feeling that they want to have when they're with others, the feeling that they want to create in the world for others. And it could be as limited to, your immediate family. It can be as big as trying to change, the country or the world. But fundamentally, it's about having that feeling. And you can only get there if you really understand who you are at a much deeper level.
It's interesting because I was writing a blog this morning talking about that. Probably for more than the first half of my life, I was always trying to be what I thought other people wanted me to be. And
Yeah.
if I could be that person, I thought I was going to be happy.
Hmm.
And I worked so hard at it. I never stopped to look in the mirror and say, "Hey, who are you?" And about 13 years ago, I was sort of kicked out of corporate America, sort of because of my age, so to speak. And um, I thought, well, that's terrible. I just developed myself doing something that I really loved. But then my son said to me, "You loved what you were doing, but you hated how you had to do it."
Mm, mm.
And that opened up my eyes. And it was like, God, you are so right. How can I change that? And, my husband had a good job, but I had a better job. And so I
Mm.
was counting the dollars. And as I counted those dollars, I didn't want to stop and look in the mirror and find out who I was. But I took the chance of doing a podcast 13 years ago, not even understanding what a podcast was.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to everyday people and find out, hey, how are you making it in the world? And all of a sudden it was like, I see a connection there.
Yeah.
I see that I can really be happy in my life. Doesn't mean I have to do for everybody else. I can still do
Hmm.
for them, but I got to do for me. And I think
Hmm.
that's what you're saying, that when you're working with some of these high profile people, you know, you're seeing what their inner core is. And if you can communicate to that, then you can do something bigger and better.
Yeah. It's I love that story, by the way, about your son. I I it, I think we talked about this just before you hit record, but I've had so many people in my life in really unexpected ways. Like you don't like I would not call my son and be like, "Hey, I need some advice." But sometimes, they come up with stuff and you're like, "Wow, that's really, really observant." Actually, my daughter was very, very funny. My wife and I were talking about we were talking about something and we both wanted to do it in like very, very different ways. And my daughter kind of looks up and goes, you both have flaws. Which I thought she's 9, by the way. Like this was the cutest thing I've ever. We all started laughing. Um, but when I was when COVID hit, we kind of stopped doing everything and we had a little bit of the luxury to do so. But I started I stepped in as the executive director for a nonprofit, and I was working, and then that ended, and I started just going back to art. And my wife said something very similar to what your son said. She's like, "You don't have to go back to that." I'm like, "Why would I not go back to that? That's what I was doing." And she's like, "Yeah, but I don't think you were that happy." And if you can take your ego and your defenses and everything that wants to be like, you're wrong. Of course I was happy. I did all that work. Why would I have done that if I wasn't happy? I decided to take a look at it. And it changed my life. I mean, her support, her wisdom in that moment, and, frankly, pat on the back, like my ability to receive the wisdom, my openness to the wisdom really changed my life. And now I like to say it's changed the life of a lot of other people. Um, but that's I've always had. I mean, I have so many. We don't have enough time on this podcast to tell you every story of every stage where someone was like, "Is this what you really want to do?" When I left tech, it was a boss of mine who was like, "Actually, is this what you want to do? You seem to really want to do this other thing." And she supported me in moving out of that company in a positive way to, and with a little money to go pay for art school. It doesn't always work out that someone hands you money for that, but that was it's a sort of best version of that story. But I've been very, very grateful to those people. And like you, I think discovered, I mean, this is how I've always really gotten very excited about learning stuff, especially about, how we work as humans. And so while I was doing tech and, leading teams in tech, I founded a tech company, like all these different things I was doing, I was always just very, very curious about that. So I was always, as soon as I'd learn something, I'd turn around and try to sort of bring others along and say, "Oh, this can help you." Like I'm the guy who's always like, "I've got this new software, you'll love it." But on a bigger scale now with what I'm doing, I get to steep myself in this world so that my clients can benefit from that, not, if you're on track to, if you're doing, some sort of social good, or you're creating an art career. I have a client who started his own agency. You don't necessarily also want to read all the books I'm reading about how, your brain works. So when you work with someone like you, or, you work with someone like me, you get the benefit of not just of, years of work experience, but the sort of virtual library that people like you are, when they're like, oh, I'm kind of up that, you're like, oh, here's how that worked. Does that shift your perspective? What if you thought about it this way? And they're like, oh, okay, actually that's really, really helpful.
Well, I think the pandemic, as terrible as it was, it really helped so many of us turn our lives around to realize that there has to be a little bit more. And, when I went to school as a kid and when I went to college, learning was not my forte. I wanted to already know it before I knew it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I fought the system. But when my youngest son was going to college, or right before I went to college, I said, I'm going back to school. I've got to figure out what is all this that I have missed. Sure, I've had careers, I've been doing things my whole life, but something was missing. And when I went back to school because I chose to, and I was paying for it, not my parents, um, I took it differently. And it was
Yeah.
like, this is a whole new world. Um, and then when the pandemic came along, and I had realized there's so much more out there, and I'm hearing so many people suffering, and not suffering from illness, but suffering from the pain of what do I do next? And I hear it with young people today who are just starting their lives going, what's my future like? And then I'm listening to the seniors of the world going, is this all there is? And there is so much more. And
Yeah.
when you talk about how your career has changed paths, it has, but you've taken the knowledge from each path to move forward.
Well, yeah, I that's right. And something you said, a lot of people who work with me are kind of, midlife, I guess, like 35 to 55. Like that just people like that's people who find me. But um I hear that stress. For the younger generation, the folks who are just graduate, in their 20s. And what I might like to say is that uh it's also okay, hopefully okay. I mean, obviously, make sure that you're, fed and clothed and housed in whatever way you can, but don't feel like you have to know. I got into coaching in my, let's say, early, but more like mid 40s. And formally, but I'd been kind of noodling with it for 20 years before that, really, um and one could, at that moment, finding this like great, really fulfilling path, say, I'm filled with regret about not doing this before. But the truth is, I wasn't, say I wasn't ready, or it just wasn't the right fit before. And it also didn't make sense. Like, I didn't have the life experience. I didn't have the wealth of knowledge, or, the research, or the books, or, that are written or read or whatever. Now's the right time. It's just the right time for that. So, getting out of that kind of lamenting of the past, or even the worry about the future. There are, obviously, you're a coach, right? Like, there's lots of exercises that you can do where you're sort of imagining the future. And that's
Right.
very, very helpful and very, very good, as long as it doesn't, stagnate you, as long as you're not looking at this thing and going, oh, and that's why coaching, I mean, this, right? Like, that's why coaching is really, really helpful, because you can look at this thing and you're like, I've got this huge dream. God, it's so big. I just can't think about it. But to have a coach work you back and give you perspective and say, okay, like that, we're not doing that tomorrow. What are you doing tomorrow? A lot of times, and I think, I wish more people kind of understood this. I think a lot of people do. Maybe your listeners do, but the the way to start is to just start. I know that sounds simple, but like, when I talk to my clients and I ask them, let's come up with some small action steps for this week. It's not like, okay, build a website and start, set up a marketing plan. It's like, no, 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 no. What's the first thing? Okay, but you can work backwards. You can say, don't forget it. Like, oh, okay, you want to build a website. What can you do today? So this is my framework for small
Sure.
steps. what can you do today in 30 minutes or less that you do not need anybody else for? Ideally, it would also be easy and fun, but we'll take what we can get. Um, and so what that means is, no, you're not going to build a website. You're going to have to like do all this other stuff. But like, what's the first thing you can do? You can make a list of website providers. You could make a list of websites that you like. That list you can make by yourself in less than 30 minutes, and you can do it, you can do it today. And so and then once you start, as you start to get this feeling.
Yeah,
That's what it's all about, is that feeling of like, okay, we're moving now. We're like on some track. Is it the right track? Maybe. Maybe you'll get we've all done this too, where you go like, how many days as a tech, I mean, I have a tech background, so I have spent days recently. I'm not saying I'm perfect at this, where I like found some new thing, got it all set up, got really excited about it, then realized I don't actually need it. And you have to have those days, right? Like sometimes you're building solutions and it's not actually solving the actual problem you have. And that's okay, right? Like we can't get stuck in those like, oh God, I wasted a day. Especially when we're out here. Like I'm thinking about entrepreneurs mostly, but even if you have a, regular salaried job, these things are gonna happen.
exactly.
You know?
It's interesting because about 2 months ago, I met somebody who contacted me and said, I can really help you in your business. I can help you grow your business overnight. And I said,
15 emails
well,
a day.
nothing
Yep.
happens overnight. So that you can't do. I said, but I'm willing to listen. What are you suggesting? And he came up with some very good little things that I thought, hey, I've never tried that before. So as I'm talking to him, I made my list and he said, so are we going to work together? And I said, well, I still have to think about this because you gave me a lot of information, but you're not going to help me overnight. So let's be honest.
Yeah.
How are you going to help me today, then tomorrow? And well, he didn't like that theory, okay? Because he was in the market to sell me something. But I picked his brain. And what I did was realize there were certain key things that I was missing on a daily basis, either in my writing or in my podcasting or in my coaching. And I contacted him afterwards and I said, I want to thank you because number one, I don't accomplish big things overnight. What do I accomplish overnight? Uh, Maybe putting the dishes, getting the dishes out of the dishwasher. Okay. That's
Yeah.
my accomplishment overnight.
Big, big
Anything
work.
else, yep. And anything else is going to be one step at a time. And when
Yeah.
you're taking those steps, that's when you realize that, you know what, I might have to pivot and go in another direction.
Hmm.
It sounds like you, as a parent, you've learned a lot of this because I think if when my son was 9 years old, if he would have made the comment that your daughter made, I would have looked at him and said, you've got a big mouth, go back to your room. But you've learned that, hey, it's okay for people to talk about what they think and what they hear.
Yeah. I like to think, and I mean, you can take courses on this, but I like to bring a coaching mindset kind of to everything, honestly, but definitely to my parenting. Which is hard because as a coach, maybe you're not supposed to, give too much advice. And obviously I have to give my kids some advice. But I'm thinking about, okay, how am I giving that? Am I, really sort of keeping them in a box and saying, this is just how we do it, or because I said so. Um, there's obviously a boundary here, but I'm willing to have a deeper conversation if they are. And I will even, as a parenting tip, like I will even say to them, hey, you're asking this question. I'm willing to have a grown-up conversation with you right now, but it means that we're not going to do any yelling or screaming. We're going to ask questions and we're going to be really curious. Like, and sometimes they're just not game for that. It doesn't work all the time, but there are times that we have had these conversations, and it doesn't always make everybody happy, but there's a deeper understanding. I'm curious, actually, I wanted to ask a question before you ask that,
Sure.
talking about um how nothing happens overnight. Like I mentioned, like I became a coach in my mid 40s, and that was, 20 years in the making, if you really want to like look at the start point. Um, when you work with people, do you have a set kind of like time that that you like to work with people to really see results in their life?
So I usually tell my coaching clients that I want to work with them for 7 weeks. Anything
Hmm.
short of 7 weeks. Um, it's probably not going to help them, and I'm probably not going to be able to offer, any real guidance because that first session, it's totally free. I'm getting to know you, you're getting to know
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And, if we're on opposite wavelengths, hey, I'm going to refer you to somebody else. And I've done a lot of that. In fact, sometimes my husband laughs at me and he'll go, wait a second, you had 4 phone calls today and you gave all 4 away because I was not the right person for those 4 people. And I'd rather refer them to somebody else. But within 7 weeks, I can get the feeling, are you committed to this? If you're not committed, then the relationship has to end because I can't make you committed. I can give you the tools. I can, you know, share so much other information. I can send them to different websites and say, hey, this is how these people work as well. But the biggest thing is if you don't commit for yourself, I don't
Yeah.
care if you go to coaching, therapy. I mean, I've been in therapy on and off, God, for 50 plus years. And only once did I commit to the therapy. Now, and I realized that that's the only one that was truly successful where I started to get to know myself.
Yeah.
But in the past, it was, well, I'm going because either my doctor says I should, or my husband says I should,
Yeah.
or that's not committing. Committing is
Right.
digging deep.
Right. And I think that's great. Thank you for that. I think that that's one of the big obstacles for people when they're considering coaching is, let's be honest, like, I can't promise you, if you're like, I want to do this with my business, I can't promise you because you have to do it. So, to say, okay, let's work together for a year, like that's a big ask for, if we've just met, especially, it's like, well, okay, I don't know. That's why I like to do very much the same thing. And what it really is, I mean, it's a little bit of a test. It's like, okay, I'm gonna give you all this stuff. Let's see how much you do with it. Are you gonna do none of it? Are you gonna do just what I ask? Are you gonna do that work and follow your own paths to openness and get, 10x the value of that work? And I've had clients do all three of those scenarios. And, typically, when someone gets what they need out of the work or more than they need, we continue working together. But my goal, I should say, also, just so I don't freak anybody out, is, my goal with all of my clients is to work myself into obsolescence. Like, I want my clients to have the tools so that they don't, need me however often, we're meeting.
Exactly.
And that's the goal is like, let's get through this. And from this, you will have a set of tools. You're going to have a notebook. You're going to write stuff down. You're going to know how to handle various situations. Now, if we need to re-engage in the future, like always great. But, I think because I think this is a life like everything we're talking about. This is a lifetime of work. Like I've had coaches,
Absolutely.
and I wouldn't even say off and on because off and on is how it should be, right? Like I should work with a coach for whatever, a year, 2 years, and then I should go and see what breaks when I'm working on my own, and then be able to come back and say, here's my weak spots. Let's work on that, as opposed to, having somebody hold my hand through it the whole time.
It's interesting because right after I started officially coaching, one of my colleagues is a grief coach. And
Mm, mm,
I was I was sort of feeling like an imposter and I couldn't understand why. Um, and I called her up and I said, I need to work with you. And she said, well, I'm a traditional grief coach. You know, are we talking about a loss of a family member or what are we talking about? I said, I think it's more the loss of my identity. And it
mm.
turned out that I did my
Oh,
grieving over my divorce many, many years ago. And it wasn't over the divorce. And I finally realized that when I got to the end point, which is still not the end point, that all the all the anger that I thought I had and all the questions I thought I had, I was able to unravel them and realize I'm so glad that happened. I needed that to happen. I can forgive myself. I can forgive him. And I still go back to her every once in a while when that, little voice pops up in my head and says, you're not good enough. I'll contact her and say, we need to talk about this. Why is that voice? Okay. And actually, I do all the talking and she'll go, you figured it out.
Yeah.
And that's what coaching to me is. You know, you can call me out if I'm not committed to it. That's fair. But you can't call me out to my thoughts and my feelings. And it's just unbelievable how this system has grown in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet there are more and more of us who need to be going through the process.
Yeah. No, and it's funny you talk about kind of the inner critic, right? I think I want to say that everybody has one, but I'm actually I'm pretty convinced at this point that my wife does not have one, and it's very strange to me. But God bless. She loves it. But I think most of us have that voice, and it's not necessarily like a voice. Like if you are hearing voices, you should go get help. But like if it's like that voice in your head that voice of doubt or even that voice of like, oh, like you took too much or you were too successful. Like it's weird, right? Like it just sort of comes at you for everything. um and there's ways what I love doing that work around that voice and ways to and tools, right? Like I give people tools as I'm sure you do around journaling or mantras or like, it sounds very woo-woo, but I'm telling you, like I was not a journaling person. I well kind of wanted to be, but like I didn't get I did Artist Way, I like did all these things. Didn't really like click for me. But I was able to find things that kind of felt like that. And then actually I took a really wonderful program. Um, and I'll say that this program, I know that this one particular coach is doing this program only one more time this year. So if people are listening, they can go find it. It's called the Creative High Growth Program. And this is with my coach Peleg Top. And it is intense. It's 100 days of journaling and art making. And you're like, okay, what for? I really got to see and understand and have tools to work with the inner critic. It's helped me as a person. It's helped me as a coach. Obviously, like I now have these tools that I can use also with my clients. But having those tools around that voice is so important, especially if you are aware, awareness being step one in any cycle of transformation, that you want to change it. Like you were aware of something that was happening and you reached out to your coach. You reached
Right.
out to get, to be in action and get some support around that. As opposed to what, trying to think your way out of it. That's the problem. That's you're right. Like that's the issue to start.
Well, my youngest son is he gets into his head, quite a bit. And he is now slowly learning to say, okay, like I'm thinking this, what took me down this path? And so he will call me. He lives 1,000 miles away. He'll call me and he'll just say, okay, just please listen. You're not my coach, but you're my rock right now. And
Hmm.
he'll spill it all out. And then he'll sort of define it for himself. And then he'll
Hmm.
go, okay, now I know what to do. And I have learned, even as a parent, not to say, oh, what are you going to do? It's like, I know he's worked it out. I can hear it in his voice. Um, and that's where I am myself, but it took me so much longer than him to get here. And I'm so grateful that he can do it, but I'm
It sounds like
grateful
you've done
that
a
I
great
can do it.
job.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
mean, just the fact that he can kind of come in and use that space of skilled listening to get what he needs is, I mean, kudos to you.
well,
Um,
you know, as a parent, and I'm sure you'll do this one day too, you're going to look back, your child's going to be in their 20s or 30s, and they're going to say something to you, and you're going to be like, well, I didn't mean to do that to you. Okay. And
Hmm.
when he first moved away, I heard myself doing that all the time. Oh, I'm sorry. I really didn't teach you how to use the checkbook. Oh, it's my fault, whatever. And one day he just said to me, stop blaming yourself. Number
Mm,
one, I didn't want to learn before. I didn't have to learn before in my own mind. He said, but I'm learning and I'm doing it on my own. But I remember the things that you said all those years in the past. And
mm,
that's one of the
beautiful.
reasons I wanted to do this podcast because I want parents to know that we're not perfect and it's okay. And we can learn from each other. And that's the meaning of life when we start learning from each other.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, God, your son, is he available? I think I might want to hire him. He sounds brilliant.
Okay.
I need a new coach.
The funny part is he would be an excellent coach, but his love is sports and music, and he's working in the sports industry. And don't ask him a question about sports because he'll have your ear for hours on end.
Okay.
What this sport is.
I'm probably a safe person to not ask questions about sports, which is funny. I grew up in Boston, which is like sports town,
Wow, yeah.
USA. Uh, well, this actually ties in. I just got back from this incredible workshop called the Hoffman process. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
Um, seven It's about 7 days. You go to a retreat center, and they have them all over the world. There's one in Connecticut, there's one in California, and then a bunch of other places, including internationally. But you go for 7 days. First thing you do is you give them your phone, and you are off the grid, So you are in the crucible. And it's really, really powerful work. And something I got clear on, or clearer on. I've done 20 years of work, therapy, and other things, working through, stuff from my childhood, stuff with my parents, like, okay. And I lived, my childhood was definitely privileged, and also sort of emotionally difficult, or not sort of, it was emotionally difficult. So I've done tons of work, right? And then I go to this workshop, and there's like a really big layer of the onion that got dragged up. Um, the thing that came up as you were talking was just this idea that we, are the way that we are, and the way that we are in relation to other people, the way that we respond to other people, call those patterns. They call them patterns, right? And those patterns, they come from your parents or your surrogate parents or your communities. Now, maybe those patterns are exactly like them. Maybe they're like them, but showing up differently so that you can say that you're not like them. Or maybe they're actually the opposite. In reality, you're like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be the opposite. And maybe it all feels great, but it's just sort of interesting to see, like, okay, like when I see my wife in the kitchen and I say X, Y, or Z, like, oh, that's a familiar pattern from my childhood. Maybe I saw a parent do that, or saw them do something different, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. Um, but like you said, getting to a place of much deeper forgiveness is incredibly liberating when you can do that. Now, did I go to Hoffman and I'm like done doing work because I got something out of it? No, I think this work goes, as you know, like I want to do this work for myself for the rest of my life. If I can do it with other people, also great. As we hit new decades, as we hit new stages of our life, as we move, have kids, don't have kids, decide not to have kids, try to have kids, don't have, like, there's all kinds of big things that can happen that change us. And it's worth, excuse me, I think it's worth examining regularly. Okay, so who am I now with this experience now under my belt, and who do I want to be? Who can someone with these tools, these experiences, what can they become, and which one of those is exciting to me? And then what do I do today in 30 minutes or less on my own to to get started on that? Um, I think it's I think it's a really beautiful process, which is why I'm so committed to it in my own life. And I honestly, like, I feel like if I wasn't doing this, I'd be not a hypocrite necessarily, but I like to be doing it so that I can also say like, yes, I'm going through this process myself. I have a coaching membership. It's a group this one is specifically for creatives. We have all kinds of creatives. We've got musicians and artists and dancers um, and I love going to that group and saying, hey, I've done this work for myself and I wanted to share my results with you. I've done this for myself and I wanted to share that with you. Just so that people can feel more welcome and more like they belong in a space where that is welcome.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And today, so many of us don't have all those safe places that we feel that we can go. And, that's why I love doing what I'm doing, because I can bring people in and say, here are some other people out there who are doing the work. Here are some other people that might be able to assist you. And you may have something to provide to them. And that's what I don't want people to forget. You don't have to be a coach to have some great tools in your toolbox, you know,
Hmm.
and please, share them with the rest of us, because there may be something in there that we haven't gone out and created ourselves. This morning, when I was writing my blog, I was writing it basically about the holiday is coming along. Some of us have plans, some don't have plans. Some feel like they're the only ones who don't have plans, that they're all alone. I went
Right,
through
right.
that a number of years ago, and I felt like, oh, it's just my son and my husband and I, and oh, woe is us. I didn't I didn't learn how to appreciate those alone holidays, but
Hmm.
I'm learning how to do it now, and what a difference. It's like I don't have to be in a room with 100 different relatives, half of us who don't like each other. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and yet
Yeah.
at the same time, I do like being around people. So you've got to find that happy medium, but you can't expect it to come to you. You have to go search it out.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think you do on some level. Because as we talked about, like, I mean, I think that the people who have been in our lives a long time, like parents and siblings, there is a real, there's a thing that happens where, there's sort of, I had a client that I was working with who really made some very big changes with her relationship with her family. She's a creative and was working on, her art and her business and everything else, but it was clear that there was something around her relationship with her family. And when that kind of became clear to her, one of the things that became clear is that, everybody in the family was really relating to her like this 15-year-old person. She's 40 now. And she's done so much work and made so many changes, and she's like, that's why this is hard, is because they haven't gotten the memo. So there's changes that she made, including, hard conversations with siblings and parents and other things about that. Now, not everyone is ready to have that kind of conversation, but I think with a coach, you can find ways to get the result that you're looking for, which looks like maybe just like a more peaceful Thanksgiving or whatever you're looking for, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I'm the youngest of three. I have two older brothers. And 8 years ago, my mother had a stroke, and I chose to move in with her and help her out in her last couple months. And so did one of my brothers.
Hmm.
And I've always been looked at as the baby of the family. But at that time, all of a sudden, the roles reversed. Both of my brothers said to me, you tell us what you need. You tell us what you need to do for mom. And it was like, wait a second. Like, you've always told me, you've always been in control. And
Mm.
I had to reach deep down inside of me and find those tools to say, hey, I am capable of doing this. You know, I can step up to the plate. And I wasn't sure if that relationship was going to last after my mother passed. And the interesting part is, we are three siblings and we walk on equal land today. And
Interesting.
we're just very lucky. Okay.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't always happen, but sometimes you have to have that hard conversation. And sometimes you have to be ready for the answers that you're not going to like. And I feel blessed, and I'm going to see one of my brothers for Thanksgiving, and that even makes me happier. So,
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you might, I mean, that with any of this work, that's the thing that you also have to be prepared for. Um, and I think that there's a mindset component to that. And it's about, what we call being coachable, which is, among many, many other qualities, it's about being willing to experiment, right? And being willing to experiment, by really looking at things as an experiment, you do have to be willing to accept different results. Like maybe I, reach out to a friend and say I want to have a conversation about something that's difficult, and this happened to me recently. I reached out to a friend and said, "Hey, I would like to talk about something that's like kind of hard to talk about," and I didn't get a reply. Um, that's good information. It doesn't feel good, but it's good information because then I can, either tell I can go to that friend and say, hey, I wrote you this like pretty vulnerable, a message and I never heard back. And I want to change that. Or I can decide that, maybe that's what I need to know about that friend and kind of put my energy somewhere else. Not to say that you should go and, prune your entire friend tree, but this is just good information as we move forward in life. Where am I putting my energy? Where does it make sense? Maybe you go to a family member and it's a great conversation and now you want to put more energy there. Maybe it's a good conversation and you don't. And all of those things are okay. If we go in, I mean, this is the problem with external expectation, right? Like if we go in and like you've probably had this conversation 1,000 times where you say, what do you want? And they say, well, I just want this person to whatever. Doesn't matter. As soon as you say, I want someone else to do something, I'm like, okay, but I cannot promise you that, and neither can you. And if you're attached to that outcome, you're going to be disappointed because unless it's exactly like that or better,
you could be
it's going to be
disappointed.
tough.
Right.
Not to say we can't work towards that. Not that I'm hedging my bets, but just to say the actual mindset that you want is to be have enough self-worth, self-love, and courage to step into that situation and know that you'll be okay on the other side no matter what. And maybe that's with the I have clients who lean on me as a coach when those things happen, and that's okay. That's part of the deal. Um, I also encourage people to find, other, where is it, where are the friendships that are really, really fulfilling? Is there a way that you could, nurture those? Like all, and it applies to work, it applies to friendships, it applies to every area of your life. But going in with this external expectation as opposed to the internal expectation of how I want to be in the face of whatever, if I'm not thinking about how I want to be, then I'm probably not going to be my best self because I haven't thought about it. Right?
Love that. So, how can my listeners follow you and learn more about your artwork? Because it looks like you've got some pretty neat art on the wall behind you.
Oh, those actually aren't even mine.
Oh,
I
those aren't
love.
even
Oh,
yours.
actually, no, no, no. This one is mine. That was actually a sort of a sketch for a much larger painting, but I really like the sketch, so I put it up. And this is my friend Sterling Hundley, who's a brilliant artist and illustrator. Um, if you go online and look up my name, I'm gonna come up. There's I think one of me in the world, Marc Scheff. So the place that you can connect with me, you can go to my website, Marc Scheff Coaching. We're making some changes to the website now, so depending on when you get this, Mark Chef Coaching is always going to work, so that's a safe bet.
Okay.
And you know what? Right now, I'm writing a weekly newsletter, and I'm writing a weekly newsletter which shares some of my art and stories from my life. And the stories from my life, because of what I do, I'm always thinking about like the story I told about my daughter and what I learned from it, and maybe that helps people. And so I'm always looking to sort of learn things and pass it on to people. So my mailing list goes, it's a once a week story and artwork, and that's where if you're looking to follow me, I would start there, and then you can get kind of a free, and it's low barrier to entry. You don't have to talk to me. It's not scary, and hopefully entertain. I've actually, it's funny. I really started taking the newsletter serious. I've had a newsletter for many years, but started taking it kind of more serious. Like I really wanted to like do a good newsletter, and I actually took some courses on and have developed my writing over the past few years. And I'm proud to say I've gotten so many responses on my recent newsletters now that I'm really committing, like you said, right? Now that I'm like really committing and doing the work and saying, okay, I'm doing this, and I'm gonna put things out there, and I've gotten kind of a wonderful response. So if that doesn't sell your listeners, I don't know what will. But if you want to go to Mark Scheff Coaching, you can join my newsletter there. And in fact, there's right now I'm giving away some free self-care checklists from a new book that I co-authored. So it's a good deal.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure all that's in the show notes. So there's no excuse for somebody to
Okay.
say, hey, I have no idea how to find Marc Scheff. I can say, well, if you go back to the show notes, that's how you'll find them. I want to thank you very, very much for joining me today and enjoy this beautiful day. At least it's sunny here in Northeast Ohio. Hopefully it's sunny
We
where
we're
you
having
are.
a sunny day in Brooklyn too, and thank you again for inviting me and for sharing your stories too. I learned a lot today.
Very good. Have a great day. Thank you.
You
Bye-bye
too.
now.
Bye bye.